So I want to talk a little bit today about a big C word, chronic illness or chronic disease. It is unfortunately a word that many people hear when they go to their doctor. We get a new diagnosis of some kind, and then we're told that it is chronic. And for many, this means, well, there's nothing we can really do about this. And I hope that in this video, I'll bring up the problem first, but hopefully there will also be some glimmer of hope in the end. So keep watching. First, some kind of grim statistics. People age 55 to 65 in America, 70% of those have at least one chronic illness. And 50% of people in that age range, 55 to 65, have 2 or more chronic illnesses that they have been diagnosed with. That's a pretty young age, and that number, it actually increases as the age goes up. So what are some of these chronic conditions? We have heart disease, many different kinds that often are diagnosed as chronic. We have diabetes, which is a really big one, and obesity. And one could combine those two and say diabesity, which is probably the most common one. And those three, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, are very closely tied together. And then we have all the different things that ends with itis, which is related to inflammation. So we have arthritis, for example, phlebitis, which is has to do with the veins. The list goes on and on of chronic illnesses. Okay, so we have established now that it's very common with chronic illness, given some examples of that. And I want to bring up one other problem that I think a lot of people that work in the medical field and a lot of people that suffer with chronic illness have observed, because it is very obvious. So considering that we have a very high-tech and very advanced medical system in America, I also see a lot of frustration from these patients that suffer with chronic illnesses, where they have a long list of medications. I've seen 15, 20, 30 different medications that they take every day. They see multiple different specialists. The weeks are full of appointments, and yet they often feel sick and miserable. And a lot of people are kind of wondering, like, what's the deal here? Why isn't it getting better? Why am I not feeling better with all that care that we're getting? Now, so I want to bring out a thought on this. I think it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole problem. So we have an excellent medical system for dealing with acute problems. So the medical system in America is great at saving lives. So when there is a flare-up, an acute episode of any of these chronic illnesses, for example, if you have diabetes and your blood sugar spikes, which can be very dangerous, you may end up in the ER, and the hospital does exactly what they are supposed to do. They save your life. Or if it's really low blood sugar, or if there's a heart attack, an acute heart episode. Hospitals and our medical system is excellent when it comes to that. But it is mostly an acute care model that is used. In other words, the goal is to save lives, and that's a good goal to have. But here's the square peg in the round hole. Most people have chronic illness, and we're still trying to solve those with an acute care model. So I think it will take a different way to think about these chronic illnesses, both for patients and for medical providers. Okay, so I promised in the beginning that we will get to some parts about what we can actually do about this problem. But first, I do want to show you a graph, and that will help to answer a very important question. What is it that makes us sick? Because if we can understand that, we can better understand what we can do about our situation, in addition to the medical care that we're getting. So let's take a look at this pie chart to my side that describes the reasons for why we get sick. And we start with the blue. That is genetics. So that's 30%. is how much genetics has an effect on whether people get sick or not, and what kind of illnesses we get. And most of us kind of know this, that we do inherit things from our parents and from our family that increases our risk. It's important to remember here that this does not determine, but it increases the risk. So it's not 100%, but it is a big chunk. And that's the part we cannot do a whole lot about. We get the genes that we get. Then if we look at the next one, the red one, that is 15%. That's social circumstances. And then we have environmental conditions that we live in. That's the yellow part, and that's 5%. And those we may or may not be able to have a lot of direct influence over either. But they do affect us. So you combine those two, we have a 20%. How much that affects whether or not we get sick and what kind of sicknesses we get. So that leaves us with the green and the orange. And this is the part that might surprise some. The orange part is access to medical care. So this was a global study that was done to come up with this pie chart. It's the CDC that did it, and they did it across the entire world. So they were able to compare between people that have access to good medical care and people that don't, and to see how much that affects our mortality and how sick we get. And it may be a surprisingly small part of the pie, only 10%. I think a lot of people probably would have guessed that the big green one would have been more the size of it. But again, that doesn't mean it's insignificant. 10% does matter. And like I mentioned earlier, if it is an acute problem, it could be a difference between life and death if we have access to good medical care. So that leaves us with the green one, the biggest one on the pie. That is 40%. And that is behavioral choices, is what the CDC called it. So that is our daily habits, the things that we do. So I want to leave you with two different ways of thinking of this information. There could be sort of a negative way to think of this, the cup half empty way to think of it, which would be more maybe along the lines of, are you saying that it's my fault that I'm sick, my own behaviors? But that's not really the point I'm trying to make here. I think we should look at the cup half full part of this. And if you think of these different parts of this pie, what part of this pie do we have any influence or say over? I would say it's the green one, is the one that we can actually do something with. Now, I know and I understand that it is not easy, and no one says it's easy to change habits or our behavioral choices. But I think we often feel trapped, and I think we can feel sort of stuck in a rut, and we can feel like everything is outside of our control, and we are just along for the ride, hoping for the best. And so I want to leave this like hope. That green part of this pie chart is the hope. That is the part where we can say, you know, if I made some changes in that area, it really could influence how I feel on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's a good place to end or conclude this video with that hope that making those changes could really improve your odds for feeling better. So it's not, I want to be realistic about it. It's not a guarantee because the other parts of the pie matters. But if we could think of ways to focus on that 40%, we have a much better chance of feeling better. So I'm going to make another video where I go into a little bit, where I break that green part down into different parts to think of where do we get the most bang for our buck? Where should we put our effort to have the best chance of it affecting our health in a positive way, and most of all, how we feel and what we're able to do in our daily life. Thanks for watching.